She did it on purpose. Archie and Lily have finally...
The rain had not stopped over Oldenburg Castle in 3 days, and inside the West Wing, Prince Christoph stood at the window watching the courtyard flood, a single folder resting unopened on the desk behind him. He had been staring at that folder for 20 minutes, unwilling to open it, because he already knew what it contained would change everything. It was the custody agreement, the final one, the one that would formally separate his children, 6-year-old Prince Oscar and 4-year-old Princess Freya, from their mother's direct guardianship and place them under the joint stewardship of the Crown Council. He had fought this outcome for 8 months. He had negotiated, delayed, and pleaded with his brother, Crown Prince Anders, to find another way. But there was no other way left. Not after what the investigators had found. Christoph sat down, finally, and opened the folder. His hand did not shake, though he expected it to. He signed his name on the last page, the ink bleeding slightly into the parchment, and for a moment the castle felt unbearably quiet, as if even the old stone walls understood the weight of what had just happened. He had married Isabel 9 years earlier, against the counsel of nearly everyone in the royal household. She was not born into this world. She came from a modest family in the South, a documentary filmmaker with sharp opinions and no patience for protocol. Christoph had loved that about her. The palace had tolerated it barely, for as long as she remained mostly private. But somewhere in the last 2 years, something in Isabel had changed, or perhaps something in her had simply been revealed. It began, as these things often do, with small inconsistencies. A missed appointment here, a canceled school visit there. Then the children's tutor reported that Oscar had stopped speaking about his mother's whereabouts entirely, offering only a rehearsed line, "She's working." When the family's physician flagged a lapse in Freya's medical checkups, someone on the Crown Council quietly opened a file. That file grew for months, page by page, until it became impossible to ignore. What the investigators eventually uncovered was not a scandal in the traditional sense. No affair, no financial crime, nothing so simple. It was something colder. Isabel, it turned out, had spent the better part of a year quietly building a media enterprise around her children without royal sanction. Unauthorized photography sold to international outlets, a ghost-written memoir proposal that used details from Oscar's private therapy sessions, and negotiations with a foreign production company for a docuseries that would have followed the children's daily lives. None of it had gone public. All of it had been stopped just in time by lawyers acting on the Crown Council's behalf. Crown Prince Anders had been the one to deliver the news to Christoph in person, in this same study, 3 weeks earlier. Anders was not a cruel man, but he was a precise one, the kind of person who believed institutions existed, because individuals could not always be trusted to protect what mattered most. "This isn't about punishing her," he had said. "It's about protecting them. You know that." Christoph had known it. That didn't make it easier. Now, with the custody agreement signed, the machinery of the crown moved quickly and quietly, the way it always did when the family's stability was at stake. Within hours, a formal welfare order was filed granting temporary joint guardianship to Christoph and the Queen Dowager, his grandmother, a woman whose calm authority had steadied the family through 3 previous crises no one outside the palace walls ever heard about. Isabel was granted supervised visitation, pending a full review in 6 months. It was not a punishment, the official statement would later say. It was a safeguard. But it was what happened 2 days after the signing that no one in the palace had anticipated. Christoph, still raw from the proceedings, had asked to see his grandmother privately. He needed more than legal counsel or public relations advice, someone who would simply tell him the truth. The Queen Dowager received him in her private sitting room, the fire low, a pot of tea going cold between them. "You did the right thing," she told him. "I know it doesn't feel like it." "It doesn't feel like anything," Christoph admitted. "I keep waiting to feel relieved. I just feel hollow." The Queen Dowager was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would haunt the rest of that week. "There is something you should know before the review begins. Something I should have told you years ago, when you first brought her into this family." Christoph looked up. "Isabel did not come to us by accident," the Queen Dowager continued. "Her mother worked for the household staff decades ago, during your Uncle Reinhardt's time. There was a closeness there, one the family worked very hard to keep quiet. Christoph felt the floor shift beneath him. What are you saying? I am saying that some of what has driven Isabel these past years may not be ambition alone. It may be inheritance. A pattern repeating itself, generation to generation, in a family that has never quite forgiven itself for its silences. The Queen Dowager's voice did not waver, but her eyes, for the first time in Christoph's memory, looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Reinhardt made mistakes. This family covered them. And I have always believed that covered mistakes do not disappear. They simply wait for the next generation to inherit them. It was not the confession Christoph had braced for. It was worse in its way because it implicated everyone, including the institution he had spent his life serving. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he walked the East Gallery alone, past portraits of ancestors who had, apparently, been keeping their own secrets long before he was born. By morning, he had made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. He would not bury what his grandmother had told him. He would not let this family's habit of silence claim another generation. He requested a private meeting with the Crown Council, the same body that had, weeks earlier, approved the custody order protecting his children. He walked into that chamber not as a petitioner this time, but as a man who intended to say something uncomfortable out loud. I signed the agreement because it was necessary, he told the assembled council. I do not regret protecting my children, but I will not stand here and pretend this family has always protected its children, or that its silences have always been in service of anyone but itself. He laid out, carefully and without theatrics, what his grandmother had shared. He did not accuse anyone still living of wrongdoing. He simply refused to let the past remain sealed while the present was being so thoroughly investigated. The reaction in the chamber was immediate and divided. Some council members argued this was ancient history, irrelevant to the matter at hand, dangerous to revisit. Others, quieter, admitted they had always suspected something had been buried during Reinhardt's era and had simply never had reason or courage to ask. Crown Prince Anders, who had orchestrated much of the custody proceedings with such careful precision, found himself unexpectedly cornered by his brother's honesty. This is not the time, Anders said afterward in private. The review board will use this. Isabel's lawyers will use this. You've handed them a weapon. Maybe, Christoph said. Or maybe I've finally stopped handing this family an excuse to bury the things that scare it. The days that followed were unlike anything the palace had experienced in a generation. No public statement was made. The family's oldest instinct, discretion, held firm even now. But internally, everything shifted. The Queen Dowager, to everyone's surprise, did not retreat from what she had revealed. Instead, she requested that the historical file on Reinhardt's era, long sealed under a clause reserved for matters of family delicacy, be reopened and reviewed alongside the ongoing custody case, not to punish the dead, she said, but to understand the living. Isabel, informed of these developments through her legal team, requested an unusual meeting, not with lawyers present, but with Christoph alone. He agreed, against the advice of nearly everyone around him. They met in a small drawing room neither of them had used in years, the one where they had first told each other, tentatively, that they were falling in love. Isabel looked different than she had in the custody hearings, less armored. I know what I did, she said, before he could speak. I'm not going to pretend the tutoring documents, the interviews, the production deal. I'm not going to pretend those don't exist. They do. I made choices I can't take back, and I understand why the council acted. Christoph said nothing, waiting. But I need you to understand something too, Isabel continued. I didn't start out trying to sell our children's lives. I started out terrified that if I didn't build something of my own, something they couldn't take away from me, I would disappear into this family the way so many people before me have. I watched what silence did to people here. I didn't want it to happen to me. And somewhere along the way, protecting myself turned into something I'm ashamed of. It was not an excuse, and she did not offer it as one. It was, Christoph realized, the most honest thing either of them had said to each other in over a year. The review happens in 6 months, he said finally. I'm not going to pretend that conversation changes what the council decided. It doesn't. But I don't think either of us wins if we keep treating this like a war. Oscar and Freya don't need a war. They need two parents who eventually figure out how to tell the truth to each other, even when it's inconvenient. 6 months later, when the formal welfare review convened, the outcome was different from what anyone had expected at the outset of the crisis. The Crown Council, having reviewed both the original findings against Isabel and the reopened historical file from Reinhardt's era, issued a ruling that surprised the palace's oldest observers. Continued joint guardianship, but with a structured, gradually expanding role for Isabel, contingent on independent oversight and family therapy that included, for the first time in the monarchy's modern history, an outside child psychologist with no allegiance to the crown. It was not vindication for anyone. It was not the sweeping victory the tabloids, had they known any of this, would have wanted. It was something quieter and in its way more difficult, an acknowledgement that protecting children sometimes meant protecting the imperfect, complicated adults around them too, and that institutions built on secrecy could not indefinitely outrun the cost of their own silence. The Queen Dowager, in one of her final public engagements before stepping back from active duties, was asked by a young reporter, carefully, delicately, whether the royal family had learned anything from the crisis. She considered the question longer than protocol usually allowed. "We learned," she said, "that the things we bury do not stay buried. They wait, and they are inherited by people who never asked for them. If this family is to survive another century, it will not be because we protected our secrets. It will be because we finally stopped needing to." Christoph, watching from the side of the room, thought of his children asleep upstairs, unaware of how close they had come to becoming symbols instead of people, and how much work it had taken from everyone to make sure they never would be. The rain, that night, finally stopped,